The rain wasn't just falling, it was assaulting the earth. It hammered against the windows of my clinic like handfuls of gravel thrown by an angry ghost. It was nearly midnight when the phone rang, cutting through the storm's noise. It was Miller, the owner of the Starlight Motel on the edge of town. His voice was tight, bordering on panic. "Dr. Bennett, you gotta get down here, now." He paused, lowering his voice. "It's the guy in room 12, Mr. Fettes. He's losing his mind, Doc. Screaming about graves, screaming that the dead won't stay dead." I knew Fettes. He was a drifter who had arrived in town a month ago. A man who looked 50, but was barely 35. The left side of his hair was jet black, but the right side was shockingly white, as if fear had drained the color right out of him. I grabbed my bag and drove into the black throat of the storm. Room 12 smelled of stale bourbon and raw terror. Fettes was huddled in the corner, his knees pulled to his chest, trembling so hard his teeth chattered. "He found me, Doc," Fettes whispered, his eyes wide and unblinking. He climbed out of the dirt. I prepared a sedative, trying to keep my voice calm. "Who, Fettes? Who found you?" He grabbed my wrist, his grip icy and desperate. "You don't believe me, but you didn't know McFarlane, and you certainly didn't know Gray." Outside, thunder shook the floorboards. Fettes began to speak, his voice drifting back to a time and place far away. "Upstate New York, 10 years ago. Fettes and McFarlane were the brightest medical students of their class. But ambition has a price. They needed fresh cadavers for their private research bodies that the university wouldn't provide. Enter Gray. Gray was a local fixer, a grave robber, and a parasite of a man. He was charming in a vile way, blackmailing the students, draining their money, and owning their secrets. He controlled them. One night, in a dim tavern, McFarlane leaned in, a cold, empty smile on his face. "We don't have to worry about Gray anymore," McFarlane said softly, swirling his drink. "I took care of the problem." The next day, a fresh specimen was delivered to their secret lab. Fettes unzipped the body bag and froze. The air left his lungs. It wasn't an anonymous corpse. It was Gray. His skin was blue cold, but that familiar, mocking sneer was still frozen on his face. McFarlane had murdered him. But they were in too deep to turn back. Terrified of prison, they did the only thing they could. They dissected the body. They cut away the evidence, piece by piece, until Gray was nothing but memory and ash. Or so they thought. Months later, they needed one last body. They drove out to a remote rural cemetery during a violent thunderstorm much like the one tonight. A woman had been buried that morning. They dug in the pouring rain, mud slicking their hands, the wind howling around them. Finally, they dragged the heavy canvas sack out of the grave and heaved it into the back of their station wagon. The drive back was a nightmare. The car skidded on the wet asphalt, the headlights cutting through the driving rain. Suddenly, the sack in the back seat shifted. Thump. McFarlane, driving, glanced in the rearview mirror. His face went pale. "Fettes," he choked out. "Check the bag. It feels wrong." "Don't be crazy," Fettes muttered, though his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He reached back, his hand trembling, and shone his flashlight into the open sack. The body inside was not an old woman. The face staring back at him was clean-shaven. The skin was waxy and pale. The eyes were wide open, dark, and filled with infinite malice. It was Gray, the man they had cut apart, the man they had destroyed. Then, the impossible happened. The dead eyes blinked. The blue lips curled into that same twisted smile. "Did you think you could get rid of me that easily, boys?" The voice wasn't spoken. It echoed inside Fettes' skull. He screamed, a sound of pure primal fear. McFarlane lost control. The car spun, crashing violently into a ditch. Fettes didn't wait. He kicked the door open and ran into the darkness, leaving the car, his friend, and the impossible corpse behind. Back in the motel, I ran. "Doctor," Fettes whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I've been running for 10 years. But tonight, I saw him, outside the window. Gray. He hasn't aged a day." Suddenly, the motel lights flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. A jagged bolt of lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the window for a split second. Standing in the yard, rain dripping from his long dark coat, was a man. He looked up at room 12. Even from this distance, I saw it, the pale skin, the dark eyes, the mocking sneer. Fettes let out a strangled gasp, clutching his chest. He slumped against the wall, his eyes rolling back. I rushed to him, checking for a pulse. There was none. His heart had simply stopped from the shock. I spun around and looked back at the window. The yard was empty. There were no footprints, only the relentless pounding rain. The rain hadn't let up for hours. It hammered against the corrugated tin roof of the security shack, a relentless rhythm that drowned out the dying hum of the electric heater. Inside, Barney shifted in his worn-out chair. He winced as his bad knee locked up a souvenir from '98 that always screamed whenever a storm rolled off the Pacific. He nursed a cup of lukewarm coffee, staring out into the abyss. Nothing but wet gravestones and heavy darkness. It was supposed to be a dead shift. Literally. The funeral director had mentioned a VIP service tomorrow. The mayor's mother was fading fast, but tonight was meant for silence. Then, the lights cut through. Twin beams of high beams sliced through the downpour, blinding and jagged. A black pickup truck didn't just park, it skidded through the mud, screeching to a halt right in front of the crematorium doors. Barney frowned, setting his coffee down. Who the hell? He grabbed his heavy Maglite flashlight and stepped out, the icy rain instantly soaking through his uniform. 3 men spilled out of the truck. They weren't mourning, they were hauling something heavy from the truck bed, something wrapped tightly in a muddy blue tarp. They moved with a frantic, twitchy urgency that made the hair on the back of Barney's neck stand up. Hey! Barney's voice cracked against the wind. He shone the beam directly in their faces. You can't be back here, the gates are closed. The driver, a tall man in a soaked hoodie, stepped forward, shielding his eyes. Relax, old-timer. Late delivery, direct cremation. Family wanted it done quiet. I don't have a manifest for a late drop-off, Barney said, stepping between them in the furnace room. He tried to look bigger than he felt. And since when do hearses look like pickups? The man didn't blink. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a wet, crumpled wad of bills. Paperwork got messed up in the storm. Look, here's $500. Take it. Go buy yourself some warm boots. Barney looked at the cash, then at the tarp. Rainwater pooled in the folds of the plastic. In 20 years at Oakwood, he'd seen grief, he'd seen bizarre rituals, but he had never seen fear like this. I need to see a death certificate, Barney said. His hands were shaking, but his voice held firm. Now. Forget the paper, Pops, one of the other men yelled, wrestling with the heavy bundle. Just open the damn door. Barney didn't budge. He limped past the driver, straight to the bundle. I'm checking the ID tag. Don't. Before they could stop him, Barney yanked the corner of the tarp back. He didn't scream, but the air left his lungs. It wasn't just a body, it was a butchery. The woman was young. Her face was pale, almost porcelain, but her neck was a ruin of bruises. The dark stains on her torn dress weren't from the mud. This wasn't a sickness. This was cold-blooded murder. Barney stumbled back, his flashlight clattering onto the wet pavement. You killed her. The tall man cursed, his hand reaching for his waistband. But then salvation, a siren wailed in the distance. It was likely just a patrol car speeding down the interstate miles away. But in the storm, it sounded like it was right outside the gates. 5-0, leave it, let's go. Panic took over. The men scrambled back into the truck, tires spinning and spitting mud as they peeled away, vanishing into the night. They left the body abandoned in the pouring rain. Barney stood there, trembling. He wanted to run, to lock himself in the shack, but his legs refused to move. The radio was dead. The main office phone was a quarter-mile hike through the mud. He looked down. The rain was washing the dirt from the girl's face. She was beautiful, in a haunting, tragic way. Mid-20s, too young to be here, too young to be cold. A sudden, crushing wave of sadness hit Barney. He had spent years alone among the dead, but seeing her lying there, discarded like trash, broke something inside him. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice lost in the wind. I'm so sorry. Ignoring the screaming pain in his knee, he knelt in the mud. He gently pulled the tarp up, trying to shield her face from the relentless rain. His rough hand brushed against her icy cheek. It was the first tender touch he had given another soul in years. Overcome by a strange mix of grief and loneliness, Barney leaned in close. He didn't know why. Maybe he just didn't want her to be alone in the dark. He pressed his forehead gently against hers, a silent, desperate prayer for a stolen life. And then, he froze. The world went silent. The rain stopped sounding like rain. A faint, icy breath tickled his ear. Her lips were blue and still, but a voice clear, sharp, and terrifying echoed directly inside his skull. "My name is Angela Ross. Rick Nolan from the shipyard did this. Defined him." Barney scrambled back, gasping for air, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He stared at the girl. Motionless. Lifeless. Dead. Darkness swarmed the edges of his vision, and Barney collapsed into the mud. The morning shift manager found him hours later, curled up by the crematorium doors, shivering and delirious. Barney wasn't making sense, just muttering the same thing over and over. Rick Nolan, shipyard, Rick Nolan. The police were skeptical, but they followed the lead. They found Rick Nolan at the local shipyard, frantically scrubbing blood from the floor mats of his black pickup. He confessed before the handcuffs were even tight. Barney was hailed as a sharp-eyed hero who cracked the case, but he never told a soul about the whisper. He resigned the next day. Even now, years later, when the rain drums against his window, Barney stays awake.